I'm Ray Mofield, and this is the Oral History Program. We're delighted today to be visiting at Philbeck and Can Funeral Home, and we're talking on this program with Neil Tolbert. Neil, thank you for letting me come.
Well, thank you for coming by, Ray, and maybe we get a little insight on what we're going to be talking about.
Well, I've known you for a good while, but I don't really know all that much about you, your background. Were you born in this area?
I was born Benton Route 2, about 3 miles over into Graves County below Oak Level.
Was that, Oak Level area? That's
Yes.
fine. And your father was who?
My father was Luther Tolbert, and my mother was Mattie Crowell, and she's related to the Harrisons. Her mother was a Harrison, who is related to all the Harrisons west of Benton here.
Uh-huh.
And
well, so you got lots of Marshall County folks in the background.
Right, and I married Elizabeth Gatlin, and she lived in Oak Level, the big city of Oak Level.
All right, so we've gotten a mixture there. Now, you were born, what, about
1920.
1920. So you're just about a year older than I am, I suppose. We're the same generation. And since you were born in that area, let's hear a little bit more about the family background. Now, we know your mom and dad. Do you remember any of the grandparents?
Yes, my father was raised by Mr. Tom Bonds, and he called her Jeannie Bonds, and they raised him from a boy of about 5-year-old, and they were my foster grandparents on his side, and then my grandparents on my mother's side was Tom Crowell and Rosetti Harrison, and she being the one that was related to the Harrisons here. I remember them very well. I remember going to their homes and spending the night. That was a big highlight of my boyhood, of getting to go home and stay with Grandpa and Grandma.
Yeah,
so,
children love to be with grandparents.
That's right.
There's just some big thrill about it. I can remember going to my great-grandfather Edwards's, and that is the biggest thrill that I ever had. For one thing, he had an old wheat binder that sat out in the yard, and I'd climb up in the seat, and I guess I imagined that I was king of the world. I sat there in that seat and drove horses.
Oh, yes. And my grandparents on my mother's side, they had a lot of hickory trees, scaly bark hickory trees, and we'd go over there and they'd crack hickory nuts, and we'd have good times on that.
Yeah.
And we were raised on a farm, but my father died when I was 5, and then my mother, I had 2 brothers and 4 sisters, and my mother practically raised the oldest child when my father died was 14-year-old, and back down to me. So we were reared right there on the farm, and there's a little hill farm.
Yes.
My mother went to the field with us, and we worked there, and I grew up on the farm.
All worked together.
Yes.
Now, was there a grade school in that area?
Yes, Bond School, grade school, and my first teacher was Clint Holmes, who is well known here in Marshall County, and he taught school till a few years ago. The last school that I know of him teaching was at Brewers. And he taught William Roberts, who is an employee here and with us here.
Oh, yes.
So he spanned back. He was he called it primer then. He was my primer teacher. So
the very first year. I remember they called it the primer where I went. I went to Blakely.
Yeah.
It was over in Callaway County a little bit, just barely south of Wadesboro.
So I went there until I was in the 4th grade, and then I went from Bonds to Simpsonia. When I was in the 5th grade, I was the first year I went to Simpsonia, and I went there because my oldest sister was a teacher, and I went everywhere she went.
You could ride
Yeah,
with her.
yeah.
Yes.
Some, but now when I
Now,
was
there
at
weren't any
school-
school buses when you first started.
No, and I got me a good job building fires at school for a dime a fire, and I'd ride the milk truck early in the morning and get out there and build a fire for Butch Heath. He ran a grocery store. You
I
remember,
knew Butch Heath.
and,
He was one of my great friends.
and then I'd go on over to school and build a couple of more fires, and I kept the central of spending money by doing
Jackson McClure was his partner.
that. Yes, but that was before Jackson came along. When he ran the what they call the Hilton Barnes store when he first came there, and he ran that for several years, and then he moved down from there and ran the peanut butter and onions place. He called it peanut butter and onions.
I've had more fun about that. I'll ask
Yeah.
modern-day students who come to Murray State if they ever ate a peanut butter and onion sandwich, and they don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, that was Butch, and he was a great teaser, and he took a liking to me, and I did, and he came by here just for about 2 years before he died, and he said, "Neil, I want you to take a ride with me," and he talked about that he wanted me to take care of him when he died.
Yeah.
So he went on, spanned many years
Well,
with
of
Butch
course.
Heath, being one of the people who had a lot of influence over me when I was growing up.
You know, there's one thing that always comes to my mind when I think of Simpsonia, and, well, at least one, and that is that I thought I was doing fairly well in basketball announcing. I could learn a starting lineup, I suppose, about as quickly as anyone. But I went to Simpsonia one night, and they started 5 McManus boys.
Yes, that is after me. Yeah, I remember those
And
boys when they were little.
so instead of just saying McManus does so-and-so and passes to Smith, Brown, Jones, and Clark, you know, you had to say Oliver McManus passes to James McManus, and it made it a lot more difficult. But that's one thing. Let's see. Cecil Reed was around there a while.
He was. I remember Cecil Reed playing basketball on the open courts back when I was little, and now Cecil wasn't one of my teachers at Simpsonia. He came there after I left. I graduated in 1939, so he came along after that teaching there. And
Well,
he was principal for several years, and a good
who
one.
were some of your teachers?
Sladen Douthit was the principal when I started going to Simpsonia.
There were a lot of people named Douthit in Graves County. I remember a bunch of preachers named Cecil and Boone and...
Well, now Boone he was a Church of Christ minister. Now Sladen Douthit, he was a principal, and he took the 1936 basketball team and won the district tournament with them. Neil Collier and Harlan Kaler and Everett Thompson and some of them. And they learned basketball together, I believe. But they were good, and they learned it, and he's kept his roots. He came by here not too long ago, and I went down to Simpsonia with him and to see the Reed twins. They've been influential down in Simpsonia all these years.
Oh, yeah.
They were right ahead of it. They were ahead of me.
I remember a postmaster, let's see, was it Edwin and...
Edward, and Edwin is his twin brother.
Uh-huh.
And they played basketball. Edward maybe started on that 36 team, and Edwin played. They played right before me, and I went to Clear Springs a year in 1936, and they jumped ball every time, center, and I was so skinny they had to pin my trunks on over there when I played ball over there. I didn't play much. I just filled in for the players, but I was...
you had fun? You learned something?
That's right. I learned something. So then, but in my early years, we all had a job to do. My mother was very strict, and
That was sort of typical of farm life then, wasn't it? They didn't want you to be idle.
That's right. Everybody had a job to do. In the morning, we'd have to go get up the old cows and bring them in and feed them and milk them.
Well, now, did you put the milkers on them? And
no, that is all by hand.
Yeah.
And
okay.
Every Saturday we had to go to the mill to get our corn ground for cornbread and all of our meal and all that. And just about everything we raised, just about everything we ate.
From a fairly early age, you could bring in stove wood.
Yes. And that was one of my jobs, and we had a wood cook stove, and I said maybe I'd go get the old cow and then come back in and get behind the stove and warm while my mother's cooking breakfast.
That felt good.
Yes, it did.
But in August, it was a different story.
Yes.
That kitchen. I wonder how Mom stood that sometimes.
Well, I do too, and you know, we didn't have any refrigerators nor even any ice boxes, and
no.
You'd come in from school and have to go to the tobacco patch first, and then if you come back in and if something wasn't soured on the table, it'd be under tablecloth, and you couldn't keep food but for just a day, and but it was good food.
Why, yes. I had almost exactly the same experience, and I guess that was as the poet said, the common fate of all.
We didn't have too much meat. It was all vegetables, and we killed our own hogs, but we just...
Essentially, the only meat you had was some pork.
I can very remember I was a teenager when the first beef that somebody brought a quarter of beef around, and my mother bought a quarter of beef, or some beef, and that's my first experience with beef wasn't too good. I didn't care too much about it. Didn't have a taste for it right then.
No, you'd never developed it, had you? Well, now, if you got out of high school in '39, you didn't have an awful long time to wait until maybe Uncle Sam tapped you on the shoulder.
Well, no, I was in Peoria, Illinois, and I thought I'd do a good turn, and I volunteered in 1943. And I volunteered, went into the Seabees. That was construction battalion of the Navy. Went with them, and we had our training in Camp Perry, Virginia, and then went to Gulfport, Mississippi, and from there to Fort Hueneme, California, and on to Hawaii, and back in
finally
Mississippi.
to the South Pacific.
That's right. We went to the Mariana Islands and built the B-29 bomber strips there. And we went from there to Okinawa, and there we were on Okinawa when the war ended.
In September the 1st, 1945.
Yes, I remember the night that they announced. There was nighttime over there when they announced it, and all the ships, we was right up over Buckner Bay, and all the ships started shooting and firing their guns, and it was pretty dangerous because they were just celebrating. And you could see those tracer bullets come right over us.
Oh, my.
So,
a little frightening in a way.
That's right. Well, there was some injured in that, not in our outfit, but some.
Well, now, let me back up just a bit. How did you get to Peoria? What were you doing there?
Well, I went, my uncle was with Caterpillar Tractor Company, and he was one of the main ones up there. I went up there, and first I got a job with a restaurant, John R. Thompson Restaurant, and worked there for about a year. And I married when I was working at John R. Thompson, making $18 a week. I'd just gotten a raise from $12 to $18 a week.
Oh, my.
So I could
you were a
get
pretty
married.
Wealthy fella.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I had been dating my wife.
Now, where did you meet her?
Well, I met her at a Brush Arbor meeting. You remember those?
I certainly do. I've been to
meetings. I met her
growing up in the Church of Christ and being close to a lot of Baptists. We had worlds of those around
Yes.
every summer.
Yes, they'd have brush arbor meetings. I met her there.
We generally went to all the meetings in the neighborhood. It's about the only thing you could do.
Right.
Didn't have enough money to go to movies.
No.
I had no car till
Well, I borrowed neighbor's horse and rode to see her one time. To Oak Level. It's about 3 miles to Oak Level. So before we went to Peoria.
Now, her name was what?
Elizabeth Gatlin, Jack Gatlin's daughter.
Yeah.
And he taught school here many, many years ago with Miss Georgia Brandon over at Old Birmingham. And he was a school teacher and a farmer. And
So you remembered her, and you were up in Peoria. Had she gone to Peoria?
no, her brother, he came to Peoria, and we got a job. I got him a job at John R. Thompson's, and we roomed together. And I'd been dating her some before then, and so we went from there, and we got married. I went home and we got married, and took her back to Peoria.
Yeah.
So we got our first apartment, cost us $6 a week. So that took about a third of our salary for just
A third of it
part.
for rent. Now that puts a little different light on
Right.
the $6, doesn't it?
Right.
$6 sounds as if it's nothing,
That's right.
but if it's a third of your income,
Yes, it was.
then that's something else. I guess you could. Well, there may be people paying a third of their salary today for rent, but I think in this area that'd be a little high, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. I think so. Well, I worked there for about a year after that, or less than a year, and then I think my uncle might have had something to do with me getting on a Caterpillar tractor, but they only paid $25 a week at there, so I was getting part of my meals at John R. Thompson. That wasn't too much better, but then near the war came along, well, we got raises, and I think I was making $49 a week when I left to go to the Seabees during the service.
Oh, you would have been a rich man back in Simpsonia then, wouldn't you?
That's right. I remember back before then, the first man that got a job after WPA was making $5 a day, and everybody in that neighborhood thought he was rich.
Yeah.
He was the first man to leave our area, and they thought he was just about rich.
What did Elizabeth do while you were gone?
Well, she worked in the factories at Evansville, and she stayed here, and of course we had a young boy back then. So
When was your son born?
he was born 1940 in Peoria.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was.
Yeah.
1940.
You have 2 children?
2 children, 2 sons. Ronald, and he was one who was born in Peoria, and then Michael was born right before we came to Benton.
Now, where is the older boy now?
He is in Jackson, Mississippi. He's with Travelers Insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael is here at Draftonville.
Mm-hmm. He lives in Marshall County.
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay, do you have any grandchildren?
I have 5 grandsons, all grandsons, and the oldest one's a history teacher at Warren Central, Bowling Green.
Right here in Kentucky.
Yes, and he was a soccer coach, and he's the girls' freshman basketball coach and assistant girls' basketball coach there. And then his brother is a senior at Western. And then Michael's 3 sons all go to Sharp Elementary.
Yeah.
They're smaller.
Mm-hmm.
So I have 5 grandsons.
Good old Sharp. Boy, that
Right.
brings some memories in basketball players, doesn't it?
That's right. They were the first team the year they won the state tournament. They was the first team to beat us on our new gym. And they beat us pretty good.
They beat a lot of people
Yes,
in
they
those
did.
days, didn't
They
they?
sure did. So we, I think we had when we got the new gym there at Simpsonia, we had an old motor that kept the lights.
Mhm.
And, you know, if that motor went down while the lights dimmed, then you
Dim.
couldn't see very well. But then we got electric lights, I guess, in 1938.
I can remember when Hardin would play at Brewers. in those early days, there before the central power lines ran through. Well, the lights would go off 2 or 3 times during a ball game, usually.
Yes, and when they were on bright, they weren't very bright.
No.
So-
You could just sort of guess where the basket was.
I don't think they played the quality ball back then that we do now, the high schoolers do now, though. You can't compare them, really.
Well, no, you can't. The rules,
Yeah.
you mentioned a while ago, for example, I think that was through the 37 year, you had jump center after every
Yeah.
score, or every field goal at least. And that slowed the game down an awful lot in many ways. However, they didn't stop the clock as much as they do now.
No, and really, the only foul they called was hacking foul. You know, that
Yeah.
got pretty rough. There wasn't one referee, and he'd get away with a lot of things back then.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I've seen everything now. The OVC this year is having 3 referees.
yeah.
The coach announced that yesterday, and I heard him at Rotary, and I said to Dick Farrell, I said, well, all my first memories of basketball, there was one official.
Well, it was all the time I went to school. Maybe the last year in the tournament, we played in the regional tournament the last year I played ball, and they might have had 2 referees in. I don't remember that well, but they just had one.
Of course, they were awfully good individual players.
Yes, I played against Joe Fox, and of course,
Red Cup.
Red Cup. I had to tried to guard him. I didn't do a very good job. He was one of the first to have the jump shot around here.
That little one-hand
Yeah.
shot up the top of the circle, boy, he was
He
deadly.
was good. And King was good.
Came a
and
center at UK under Adolph
That's
Rupp.
right, and I played against Joe Fox my last year over at Old Birmingham.
Well,
And
now,
they
he
had-
was the best I ever saw, I
Yes,
guess.
they had pot-bellied stoves over at Old Birmingham, and I remember they made us stop Acre Austin. Now, you remember Acre Austin?
Yes.
He was referee, and then they got so rough that he stopped the game and went to both benches and said if they didn't put me in so rough, he's just going to call the game off
Mhm.
because, you know, he couldn't keep
Yeah.
up with it that well. But
Yeah.
Joe Fox was...
He was a good official. Everybody called him Spaghetti.
Yes,
It was a
Spaghetti
nickname.
Austin.
I remember him quite well, calling many, many games.
But now, Joe Fox, I remember a particular game in the regional tournament we played. He made, they lost to Calvert City, and he made all but 2 points. And there was a nun boy made the other 2 points, but they only got big 2 points.
Yeah.
He made all of them. He was good.
We're down to about 5 minutes, Neil.
All righty.
I want to
Okay,
ask
sure.
you, well, maybe at the end, any funny things that have happened to you in instance you want to tell, but how did you ever decide you wanted to get into the funeral business?
Well, I felt like that would be a job that would always be
Needed.
needed.
Mhm.
And I felt like that I could, if I talked to Otto Ken, the first man I ever talked to about this. He didn't have a place for me, and he told me how hard it was. But I felt like that might be something that I could do
Mhm.
and do good at. And I like people and I like to be with people, and I made up my mind and dedicated my life to this business.
Now, you had to go off somewhere to undertaker school or
Yes,
whatever
I
you
had,
call it, mortuary science.
You have to have an apprenticeship at a funeral home, and I did that at the Byrne Funeral Home in Mayfield, and then I went to Nashville and went to school in Nashville, Tennessee, at a school
Yeah.
down there, Gupton Jones School
Mhm.
for mortuary science, and I had to go to there and for a year, and 2 years apprenticeship, and then I came to Benton, fell back in Canada, 1953. And
53.
1953. So it'd be in March of next year, it'll be 35 years. being here on
35 years ago.
here in this
Well,
corner.
you almost feel at home here
That's
now.
right, and I very well remember your mother was the first year I was here.
Yes.
We took care of your mother, and
Mother died in, I believe it was the 27th of October.
yes, and she died at home
Uh-huh.
there in
Right.
Hardin. You all were at the farm place in Hardin.
Right.
So I remember that very well. And down through the years, why, we've buried a lot of people, and I have
Never been sorry you
No.
got into the field,
it,
and you worked long enough that after Mr. Can's death, then you worked for his widow, I guess, and
oh,
bought into
well,
the company.
I
and-
became a partner here in 1963.
Oh, before his
Yes,
death. Yeah.
before his 1963, I purchased a third of this place,
Mhm.
1963, and we went till 1970. Jerry was with us then, and Mr. Can and Miss Philbeck retired, and they sold their business to Jerry and I, and we became co-owners of this
Mhm.
place in 1970, and we've had it since then.
Uh-huh.
So William Roberts has been with us since 1967, most of the time. He
Mhm.
went back to Penwalk for 1 year, but he's been with us. And Neil McWater's with us now for 2 years. So we've had a
Do you
pretty
have
good-
any unusual stories or anything you'd like to tell before we get off? I mean, without embarrassing someone too much. Naturally, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but
well,
maybe
no.
something that happened to you that would be kind of funny. And
Well, we've had things to happen in this business. It was in a way funny. I remember one time we was having a funeral, and a lady went to her husband in a casket, and she said, "Honey, there's one thing about it, you won't have to mow them old yards anymore." And said that, "I'll tell you another thing, I ain't either." That's always.
I heard one of the, I guess it was Boone Douthit, who came here to preach one time, and he told about what happened to his brother. And he was preaching a funeral somewhere, and there were identical twins, and one of them had died, and he got it up backwards.
Mhm.
One was kind of a black sheep, and the other was an elder of the church
Yeah.
and noted as a good fella.
Mhm.
So he tore into this one that had died. He tore into the one that was living,
Yeah.
and said, "If you don't change your way of living, you're going to go just where George went."
Yeah.
And somebody jumped up finally and said, "Well, preacher, you've got it backwards."
Well, we had one experience similar to that. A preacher was preaching at preacher's wife's funeral, and instead of calling his wife's name, he called his daughter's name all the way through, that he was preaching his daughter's funeral.
Yeah.
We've had that, and one other experience maybe that was unique. We was closing the casket one time, and the family was in the chapel while we closed the casket, and there was a lady evidently had claustrophobia, and about the time the casket lid went down, while she yelled out, "Give him air."
Yeah.
And so evidently she had claustrophobia and saw that go down
Uh-huh.
on him, and it caused her to do that.
Caused her involuntarily
Yeah.
to yell out.
Right.
Well, Neil, 29 minutes has gone by in a hurry. You've been a wonderful person to interview, and I thank you again for letting me come.
Well, thank you for coming, and I hope this hadn't been too boring.
Well, I hope not. Many people do enjoy our oral history. I'm Ray Mofield. We return you now to our studio.